I got home earlier than expected that morning, the kind of gray Portland morning where the air feels saturated enough to drink. A light drizzle clung to everything. My jacket, my hair, the front steps. I'd only been gone 2 days on a short work trip to Seattle, but I felt that familiar pull toward my own space, my own coffee mug, my own bed. The house was quiet when I unlocked the door. Not silent, more like the kind of stillness that has an undercurrent, the faint hum of a fridge, the ticking of the wall clock, the sense that something in the air has been disturbed recently. I stepped inside, shaking off my umbrella, and immediately saw it. A folded slip of paper on the hallway console. It was glossy, with the kind of faint sheen you see on boutique hotel receipts. I picked it up without thinking. The first thing that caught my eye was the logo, one I recognized from driving downtown but had never set foot inside. It wasn't the kind of place you stayed unless you were visiting on purpose. My gaze slid down the page. Double room, late checkout, date and timestamp, yesterday afternoon. I'd been giving a presentation 170 miles away at that exact hour. I stood there for a long moment, my bag still slung over my shoulder. The kitchen drew me in next. There was a half-finished glass of wine sitting on the counter, a deep red stain clinging to the inner curve of the glass. Caroline doesn't drink wine on weekday afternoons. In fact, she rarely drinks alone at all. The cork sat beside it, bottle still half full. When I headed toward the laundry room, something caught my eye. A man's t-shirt draped over the side of the laundry basket. Not my size, not my brand, and stamped with the logo of a local gym I'd never set foot in. The cotton was still faintly warm from the dryer, carrying that just-washed scent. Except underneath it, faintly, there was something else. That's when I noticed it. The air held a whisper of cologne. Not the kind I wear. Mine is subtle, woodsy, and only lingers for minutes. This one was bolder, sharper, with an expensive, peppery note that clung in a way that made the room feel smaller. I was still holding the hotel receipt when I heard her footsteps. Caroline appeared in the doorway, her hair pulled back loosely, wearing a sweatshirt and leggings, bare feet on the hardwood. The sight of me didn't make her jump. If anything, she slowed just slightly, like she'd expected me to be there. Maybe not at that exact moment, but soon enough. Her eyes went immediately to the paper in my hand. I saw the smallest flicker cross her face. Not panic, not surprise, but calculation. Like she was flipping through a mental file and pulling out the right card to play. She moved her gaze from the receipt to the wine glass on the counter, and then her expression softened into something casual. Before I could open my mouth, she began talking. "Oh, right, that's from yesterday," she said, her tone light, almost cheerful. "Melissa flew in for that conference, remember? She needed help checking into her hotel, so I met her downtown." She crossed the kitchen, picked up the wine glass, and took a small sip before setting it back down. "I had a drink here afterward, just trying to unwind. Long day at work." Her explanation was seamless. Not a single pause to think. Not a hint of hesitation. Every detail neatly in place. It was so quick, so clean, that I realized she'd already run through this in her head before I walked through the door. She'd expected me to notice. Maybe not the shirt, maybe not the cologne, but at least the receipt and the wine. And she had prepared her story so it would slide into place like a key in a lock. I nodded slowly, tucking the receipt back onto the console as though I accepted the answer. But inside, something else settled in. It wasn't just that her story didn't feel right. It was the fact that she had one ready. I've been married to Caroline for nearly a decade. I know the look she gets when she's genuinely caught off guard. Her eyes widen, her brows knit, her mouth opens just slightly before she speaks. This wasn't that. This was something smoother, practiced. The kind of delivery you only have when you've already told yourself the version you're going to give someone else. I watched her move around the kitchen, rinsing the glass, sliding it into the dishwasher. Her movements were calm, almost rehearsed, like she wanted me to see a picture of normalcy. "Melissa," I repeated after a moment. "From your office?" She smiled without looking at me. "No, from the branch in Spokane. We met at last year's retreat. You probably wouldn't remember her." I said nothing. Her explanation accounted for the receipt. It accounted for the wine. It did not account for the man's t-shirt sitting in our laundry basket or the faint, unfamiliar cologne hanging in the air like an echo. But she didn't offer anything for those. And I didn't ask, not yet. Because here's the thing. When someone is lying to you, especially someone you know better than anyone else in the world, you can feel it. Not from what they say, but from how they say it. The pauses they don't take. The way they glide over details without inviting questions. I stood there in the kitchen, nodding along, as if I believed her. But in that moment, something shifted. Up until then, I'd always assumed if anything like this ever happened, it would come crashing in, a loud revelation, some undeniable evidence, an argument that broke everything open. But here it was, quiet as a whisper, sliding into my life in the form of a receipt, a wine glass, and a shirt that didn't belong to me. And it was the quietness that made it worse, because it meant this wasn't a sudden mistake. It was something that had already been thought about, managed, controlled. And that control told me she'd already crossed a line. Looking back now, I can trace the moment that morning to a string of smaller moments. Tiny shifts I had been brushing aside for months. At the time, I didn't label them as signs. I told myself every marriage goes through phases, that people change tastes, routines, habits. But with the hotel receipt fresh in my mind, the pattern sharpened into focus. It began, I think, with her scent. Caroline had worn the same perfume for years, a light, citrusy fragrance she bought at the little shop near our old apartment. It was part of her, in the way you get used to someone's laugh or the sound of their footsteps coming down the hall. One day it was gone. In its place was something entirely different. Floral, expensive, layered with notes I couldn't place. When I asked her about it, she smiled like it was nothing. "They discontinued the old one," she said, brushing past me to grab her bag. Figured I'd try something new. I believed her. Or maybe I just wanted to. Then there was the phone. Caroline used to leave hers charging on the kitchen counter at night. Sometimes she'd get up to refill her water and forget it was even there. But lately it was always with her. In her pocket while cooking dinner. On the bathroom counter while she showered. If it wasn't in her hand, it was face down on the table, screen dark. I noticed how quickly she responded to certain messages. Her thumb darting across the glass, the corner of her mouth lifting into a smile that she never turned toward me. Once, when I walked into the living room unexpectedly, she tilted the phone just slightly away from my line of sight. Her schedule began to shift too. She'd come home later saying work was running behind. Sometimes she'd blame traffic, other times a last-minute project. But when I checked the rideshare receipts tied to our joint account, the pickup and drop-off points didn't match the locations she'd mentioned. She'd say she was at the office, but the receipt would start at a cafe halfway across town. Evenings we used to spend together became plans with friends. I didn't know. I'd suggest a weekend trip to the coast or a drive up to Hood River, and she'd say it wasn't a good time. Too much going on at work, too many deadlines. But somehow, she had the time for these other outings. Her laughter changed too. Not the sound itself. She's always had this light, bright laugh, but the timing of it. Late at night, when I was in bed reading or half asleep, I'd hear her laugh quietly from the living room, the glow of her phone lighting her face. Sometimes it was just a short burst. Other times it was the kind of laugh you share when you're in on a secret. I remember one night in particular. I'd gone to get a glass of water and saw her sitting cross-legged on the couch, phone in hand, smiling down at the screen like it was telling her a private joke. She didn't hear me at first. When she finally looked up and realized I was there, she locked the screen almost too quickly. "Just something funny in the group chat," she said. I didn't ask which group. Then came the shopping. Charges started appearing on our joint statement from stores she never used to visit, in neighborhoods she rarely had a reason to be in. Upscale boutiques, the kind that didn't match her usual style, or at least the style I thought was hers. I'd ask about them in passing, and she'd wave it off. "Just browsing during lunch," she'd say. "They had a sale." And then there was Jenny. I noticed the contact one night when her phone buzzed on the coffee table and the screen lit up. It was late, close to midnight. The name read Jenny, followed by a string of emojis. I didn't think much of it until it happened again the next night. And the next. Always late. always followed by the same small, private smile. When I asked casually who Jenny was, she barely looked up from her laptop. "New friend from yoga," she said. "We've been texting about class schedules." I'd never heard her mention a yoga class before. If I'm honest, part of me didn't want to press her. Pressing her meant inviting the answers I didn't want to hear. It meant pulling on threads I suspected would unravel more than I was ready for. But every small change, every brushed-off explanation, stacked on top of the others like bricks. And standing there that morning, hotel receipt in my pocket, cologne still lingering in the air, I realized the wall those bricks formed was keeping me out of something. Maybe she thought I wouldn't notice, or maybe she knew I would, and she'd already decided it didn't matter. There's a peculiar kind of dread that comes from watching the person you know best become someone you can't quite read. You find yourself replaying conversations, re-examining moments, wondering if the shift was gradual or if you simply failed to see it all at once. And now, with the weight of that receipt in my jacket, I was seeing it everywhere. It's one thing to suspect. It's another to know. Up until that point, my unease had been built on fragments. Odd changes, late nights, a growing collection of small lies that could still, if I tried hard enough, be explained away. But suspicion has a weight to it, and mine was getting heavier by the day. The moment it tipped into certainty came without warning. It was a Thursday evening. I was at my desk, clearing out emails before heading to bed, when a notification slid across the corner of my laptop screen. It was from a travel booking service we sometimes used for vacations. My first thought was that it was spam. But then I saw Caroline's name in the subject line. The email was a confirmation. One night stay. Waterfront hotel suite in Seattle. The date matched the night she'd told me she was working late. I stared at it, rereading the lines over and over as if they might rearrange themselves into something else. They didn't. When I asked her about that night, casually just to see, she said she'd been in the office until after midnight, finishing a report. She told me about the headache she'd gotten, how she'd barely made it home without falling asleep at the wheel. Her voice was calm. Her face gave nothing away. If I hadn't seen the email, I might have believed her. But I had. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I held on to it the way you hold on to a piece of glass in your pocket. Not because you want to keep it, but because it's sharp enough to use later if you need to. 3 days after the email, I was running errands downtown. The rain had stopped for once, leaving the streets slick and shining under the late afternoon light. I parked near the pier to grab something from a hardware store, and that's when I saw her. Across the street, near a row of metered spaces, she was leaning into the passenger side of a man's car. I didn't recognize him. Tall, dark hair, clean-shaven, wearing a charcoal coat. He was smiling at something she'd said. She rested her hand on his shoulder, her body angled toward him in a way I'd seen 100 times before, except it had always been toward me. Then she kissed him. Not a quick peck. Not something you could mistake for a friendly gesture. Her hand slid briefly to the back of his neck, and his touched her waist. There are moments when the world doesn't spin so much as it drops. My chest tightened, and my ears filled with a hollow rush. Every sound around me, traffic, footsteps, the distant call of a gull, faded until there was just that image. I stood there, frozen, the grocery list in my jacket pocket suddenly feeling absurd. I thought I was prepared to see something like this, but preparation is a myth. You're never ready to watch the person you've built your life with step so fully into another life without you. She didn't see me. They spoke for a moment more, and then she stepped back, waving as he pulled away. She adjusted her scarf, glanced at her phone, and started walking toward the other end of the block. I turned and walked in the opposite direction, my pace quick, my pulse hammering in my ears. There was no more room for doubt, no more benefit of the doubt to give. Caroline wasn't just distracted, or distant, or going through something. She was living an entirely separate existence, one I had no place in. I drove home on autopilot, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the house felt like a set I'd wandered onto by mistake. A stage dressed to look like our life, but hollow behind the walls. I didn't tell her I'd seen her. I didn't slam the door and demand answers. I didn't ask for an explanation that would only be another story. Instead, I started taking stock. Mentally, quietly, what I would take if I left. Which accounts had my name on them. Which passwords to change. Which things in the house were actually mine. Because once you've seen the truth with your own eyes, the only thing left is deciding what to do with it. In the days after seeing her at the pier, I carried the truth around like a stone in my pocket. Heavy, undeniable, and cold to the touch. I didn't tell her I knew. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a confrontation, the scene she might have rehearsed in her head. I think she expected me to come at her, to shout, to demand the names and the whys and the how long has this beens. Maybe she'd even planned her lines, ready to shift blame or cry until I softened. But I wasn't going to hand her that stage. Instead, I went still. I came home at the usual times. I made small talk about the weather, about work, about the neighbor's new fence. But behind the scenes, I began dismantling our life in a way she couldn't see. Thread by thread, quietly and methodically. I started with the essentials. A couple of shirts and jeans went into my duffel bag, followed by my running shoes, a jacket, and my toiletry kit. Nothing that would set off alarms if she happened to glance into the closet. The bulk of my packing was mental. I walked through each room, cataloging what I'd take, what I'd leave, and what I could replace later without much thought. At night, after she fell asleep, I'd sit in the living room with my laptop, closing joint accounts one by one. The streaming service we shared, unlinked. The old photo sharing folder, deleted. The automatic bill pay we'd set up together, canceled. I wasn't just removing my name from things. I was removing my presence from her reach. It's strange how easy it is to disappear from someone's daily life without them noticing. At least at first. The moment I knew I was ready came on a Tuesday morning. She was in the shower, steam curling out from under the bathroom door. I stood in the hallway with my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, listening to the rush of water, and realized there was nothing left for me to wait for. No confession was going to change what I'd seen. No apology would roll back the months of deceit. The version of Caroline I'd loved had already left, long before I did. I walked out without a note. My new place was a furnished studio downtown, small, with creaky floorboards and a single window that looked out over the street. The kind of space that felt temporary but safe. I could cook just enough for myself, keep my things in plain sight, and, most importantly, lock the door knowing everything inside belonged to me. The first night there, I sat on the couch and listened to the hum of the fridge, the occasional passing car, the low murmur of voices from the building next door. It wasn't silence exactly, but it was absence. The absence of her voice in the other room, the absence of my own guard being constantly up. I didn't tell anyone where I'd gone at first, not even close friends. My phone stayed silent except for her messages, which I ignored. At first, they were short, "Where are you?" But as the days passed, they grew longer, full of the kind of faux concern and carefully chosen phrases meant to reframe the story. She didn't know how much that silence unsettled her. Caroline had always been the one steering our conversations, shaping how things were told. Without me responding, without me giving her something to twist, she was left talking into a void. That was the point. In the weeks that followed, I moved through my days like I was learning a new language. Grocery shopping for one. Coming home to no shared mail in the box. Cooking meals that didn't have to accommodate someone else's tastes. It was a strange kind of freedom, quiet, deliberate, and bittersweet. I changed every password. Removed my name from the utility accounts. Redirected my mail. The work was tedious, but it felt like reclaiming square inches of my life, one at a time. Friends started to notice. "Haven't seen you with Caroline lately," one would say. Or, "Everything okay at home?" I kept my answers simple. "We're taking space." That was all I'd give them for now. Every so often, I'd pass a place we'd gone together. A cafe on Burnside, the little bookstore near Hawthorne, and feel the echo of what we'd been. But the echo didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. If anything, it reminded me that the good parts had been real once, which somehow made the leaving feel more necessary, not less. By the end of the first month, the studio felt less like an escape and more like a choice. My clothes hung in the closet without competing for space. My books were exactly where I left them. My phone didn't light up with her name unless I let it. One evening, I went for a run along the waterfront, the city lights rippling in the Willamette. I stopped halfway across one of the bridges and leaned on the rail, breathing in the cool air. It hit me then. There hadn't been a single moment since I'd left where I wondered if I'd done the right thing. That was my answer. It had been just over a month since I left the house, though some days it felt like a week and others like a year. Life in the studio had settled into a quiet rhythm. Early mornings with coffee by the window, workdays that ended without the heavy air of suspicion, evenings spent walking downtown just because I could. I wasn't looking for anything new. Romance wasn't even on the table. My focus was on breathing again, on learning what my days felt like without her shadow in them. Then I met Emily. She lived 2 doors down on the same floor, and the first time we spoke was in the hallway when I was juggling a grocery bag that was about to split. She held the door open for me, laughed when a head of lettuce rolled out and said, "You've officially brought salad to the whole building." Her voice had this easy warmth to it, like she wasn't trying to impress anyone. Over the next couple of weeks, we crossed paths more often, sometimes in the lobby, other times outside when we both happened to be coming back from errands. Conversation was never forced. We'd swap comments about the weather, joke about the building's unpredictable elevator, or compare takeout recommendations. One Friday, I found a note slipped under my door. It was from her, written in neat, slanted handwriting. "There's a rooftop restaurant I've been wanting to try. Best city view in town, or so they say. Dinner? My treat if you hate it." I almost said no. Not because I didn't want to go, but because part of me still felt like I was standing on uneven ground. But I could feel how easy it was to be around her, and I realized I hadn't felt that kind of ease in a long time. So I said yes. That night, we took the elevator up together, stepping out into a space strung with warm lights and lined with small tables. The air carried the scent of grilled vegetables and something citrusy from the bar. The view stretched over the city, the bridges lit in soft yellow, the Willamette dark and glossy under the moon. Emily was a natural conversationalist, but she didn't fill every silence. We talked about books, music, our favorite neighborhoods in Portland. She told me about the small art classes she taught on weekends. I told her about running along the waterfront when I needed to think. Laughter came easily, and for the first time in months, it wasn't covering anything up. It was just laughter. Halfway through dinner, Emily's eyes flicked to a table across the room. "Do you know them?" she asked, her voice low. I turned. Caroline. She was sitting with a group of friends, 3 women and a man I didn't recognize. Her hair was styled, her dress was new, and the laugh she gave at something across the table was the kind she used to save for private moments. She hadn't seen me yet. For a few seconds, I just watched. I didn't feel the rush of adrenaline I might have expected, no urge to duck my head or leave. Instead, I felt oddly steady. Then her gaze swept the room and landed on me. Her smile faltered, just for a moment, but in that moment, I saw the shift. She took in the sight of me sitting across from Emily, our drinks half finished. My shoulders relaxed in a way they hadn't been in years. The calm between Emily and me was a sharp contrast to the tension that had defined my last months with Caroline. Emily must have noticed too, because she leaned in slightly and asked, "Is that someone I should know about?" I smiled faintly. "Someone I used to know very well." We didn't talk about it further, but every so often, I could feel Caroline's gaze on us. I didn't return it. I didn't need to. When the check came, Emily insisted on splitting it. "No way you're letting me pay just because I invited you," she said, smiling. We left the rooftop together, stepping into the cool night air. I could feel the difference in my own body, no tension, no second-guessing, just a quiet awareness of the moment. Later, I would hear from mutual friends that Caroline had noticed the whole thing. The way Emily and I leaned toward each other, the ease of our conversation, the way I seemed free. They said she'd gone unusually quiet that night after her friends asked about me, offering only vague answers before steering the conversation elsewhere. But the truth is, I didn't need to know what she thought. That dinner wasn't about her. It was about realizing I could sit across from someone and feel completely present, with no script in my head, no hidden scoreboard tallying slights and lies. And that, more than anything, made me realize how far I'd already moved on.